Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna continue with our Valentine's Day inspired outfit. I made the dress last time that I uploaded, I think it was 2 weeks ago. And for this project we're gonna do the jacket, or the half jacket I guess, the sleeves that I had planned in my little sketch that I did. And I already started, so just don't look at that to not get spoiled. If you haven't already seen, I wrote a book. It's called Einfach Wow Nein, so in English, something to the effect of simply so like wow. You can pre-order it now through the link in the description. You will also get a signed, personalized copy if you order between the time frame that is on screen right now. And this is just a super easy way to support me, and you'll get something really cool as well. So please head over to the link down below and get your own copy. The jacket that we're gonna do today is gonna have a hemline that goes like this to the back, where it's gonna go kind of heart-shaped to the center back, and I'm super excited. I already started, as I said before. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is to put basically it's a yoke of the back together with the heart of the back. So I put the upper back piece together with the center back piece, which is the heart. Now there are some notches in the pattern that you need to match up, but on top of that you also need to cut into the seam allowance of your upper back piece in order to be able to match both lengths up. I always like to, do the notches first and then continue in between the notches and match everything up that way with a lot of pins. And once that's done, we can already go ahead and sew both pieces together. Now, what you want to do in the center back, as there is that tip of the heart, like that dip, I guess, it's probably the easiest to first sew one half of the heart, back tack, take your piece off of the machine and then cut towards the stitching line, and then pin the other side as well. It's also very handy to mark your stitching line so that you can match up both of the corners in your upper and your center back pieces right in that center back seam. And you'll see that once you cut towards the stitching line in your center back piece, so in the heart-shaped kind of piece, that it'll open up once you continue pinning the piece to the other side. So make sure to start your next seam right where you ended that first seam to get the perfect dip of that heart shape. I also decided on short notice to actually use some piping in between the seams to just exaggerate the shape a tiny bit more. You don't have to do that. You can just simply use the shapes as seams and make it stand out like that. But I wanted to use the fabric that I had left over of my dress that I made and just made a simple piping. So basically I just cut out a few 3 centimeter wide pieces on the bias, put them together so that it's a long strip of fabric, and folded in half, wrong sides together, and stitched it onto my heart first, all around, because I wanted to have it on the bottom as well. And then I put the upper back onto that whole thing. Same thing with the upper back and the center back. If there's piping in, I just wanted to, put it out there that you can also embellish that seam if you want to, which is what I did. Once that's done, we're gonna iron the seam allowance into the heart, and that is because you want all of the seam allowance to be towards the upper back. So if you think about it as a yoke, you always iron the seam allowances into the yoke. Same thing for that. So the piping faces into the heart. We're gonna have a little bit of an issue. It's not gonna be an issue, but there's just a little something that we have to manage once we put the hem facing on, but we're gonna see about that once that's time. Next, we're gonna grab our side back pieces. So these are the small, weirdly shaped pieces that are gonna connect our heart with the side seam. There is a notch again in the side back piece, and there are also notches in the heart. So obviously you're gonna use the back sleeve point where the upper back also stopped as the start, so stitching lines aligned. And then there's one in between, a notch that you're going to match up in both pieces, and then there's a third notch which marks the end of our side back piece. So you're going to match that notch also up with the stitching line of your side back piece. If you need to, also cut in between the notches towards the stitching line to open that seam up, or like to take out the tension of the seam allowance, and to be able to match both lengths up, and then you can sew that seam as well. The seam allowance is gonna get ironed towards the side back so that the piping, if you're using it, all faces the same direction, or if you're not using piping, then also the seam allowance faces all in the same direction, because the next step that I did was to just top stitch at 5mm to fix everything in place. That's just gonna give this whole back piece a nice finish, and it's gonna look, you know, how it's supposed to. So just carefully stitch all around the heart and check that it is all the same distance so that it looks neat and tidy, and the seam allowances also face away from the heart. Then we can also already close our shoulder seams. That's just the usual thing that we always have to do. So just put right sides of front and back pieces together, align the shoulder seam and also close it. We're gonna iron the seam allowance open. If you're using any thinner fabric than me, I'm using a coat fabric that I was using for this project right here, so it's a very heavy, thick fabric. So I am going to iron the seam allowance open just to avoid bulk. If you're using any thinner fabric, as I said, you can also, as per usual, normally you would do that, iron the seam allowance towards the back. It just gives a little bit better of a shape in the seams at the shoulder. So now we can already prep our collar. So we have a facing and a shell piece for the collar. Basically, we're gonna put right sides together and just sew along the rounded edge. What I like to do usually before sewing is to iron the seam allowance of my shell piece, of that straight side, not the curvy one, towards the inside, towards the wrong side, as preparation once we actually put the collar on. We're gonna do that as the very last step, because we're gonna sew all of the lining and facing pieces onto the collar as well, and then we're gonna close everything. So that's gonna be our turnover point. Usually it's in the hem or in our sleeves, but since we're using a stand-up collar, we can just do that over the collar. So we're just gonna prep it, but not actually sew it on. There are some notches in both of the pieces that you have to align, obviously, and we're gonna stitch from the stitching line, so not from the edge of our piece, all around the upper rounded edge of the collar to fuse both pieces together. And once that's done, we're gonna cut away the seam allowance at the rounded areas to be able to actually turn the collar over, and then we're gonna iron the ditch of the seam towards the facing side. With that done, we're gonna put this away to the side, and we can continue with our bodice right here. Now, since the sleeves, because of the cuff situation, we're gonna have a little small cute cutout of a heart in the cuff. Because of that, we can't leave our side seams open, since we have to put that together for that cuff situation. So we can now already put right sides of our jacket together and close these. Let's iron the side seams open as well, like that, and then the shell is already done. So for the sleeves, we have this small little cute detail down here. I wanted to do a heart cutout just to be a little playful, I guess. But in order to do that, since we have our cuff right here, and you can see that it is exactly the other way around, we actually are going to put the side seam of the sleeve together first. So we're putting right sides together and close the sleeve side seam. Once that's done, I'm gonna iron my seam allowance open, making sure that I'm not erasing what I drew on here. And now, since we now have the exact same layout like the facing, we can put right sides together, and it should perfectly fit together like this, and match up the heart shape that we have in our cuff right here. So we're going to start sewing right here around the heart and then around the cuff. So we're gonna match up this point in facing and shell like this right here, and this point, the corner, in both pieces. Make sure that it's matched up perfectly. And you can also do some in-between pins if you want to, like this. And then the same on the other side. And then we have the edge, the notch right here that marks the side seam. Make sure when you sew that the seam allowance stays open, and then the in-between just gets matched up. So now we can sew from this point around the heart, around here, to this point. And you want to make sure to use a very teeny tiny stitch. I'm gonna do like 1.5, something like that, to have, you know, as much stitches in this area as possible. And then I'm gonna go down around here, ow, and back up again until I reach this point here. With that now done, we can go ahead and cut away the seam allowance very drastically, especially around the heart. So I cut it down the edges and then this piece to 3 millimeters. And then right here, I'm gonna go in diagonally like this, and then down to almost nothing, like 2 millimeters, 2 to 1. And then here the same, like this. And then we can also cut towards the stitching line at the very curvy parts of the heart in order to take out the tension right there as well. Just be careful not to cut the thread of your seam. And then right here in the corner, you need to also cut towards the stitching line like this. And then we're gonna repeat the same on the other side. Gonna cut diagonally and then here to almost nothing. And then we're also going to cut towards the stitching line very carefully, like this. And then down here, we also want to cut towards the stitching line as it's a little bit curved, like that. And now technically we can already turn this right sides out, but I want to close this side of the sleeve as well, because now we can still reach it better right here. Since we have this point, which is very, very important, we can see it perfectly if we put them together like this. So I'm just gonna match up this point where I stopped stitching right here. It doesn't matter what you painted onto your fabric before or what you marked. It's now a matter of where your stitching line stops. So you want to match up these points like so, and then your facing and the rest of your sleeve you're gonna sew together. Okay, that's now also sewn. So let's also very carefully cut down the seam allowance here. And we're also going to iron this open. I'm going to use my sleeve board to do that. Okay, and now we can turn this whole thing right sides out. So I'm just gonna go in here, grab this corner and turn this out, and then repeat for this side. An edge former is super, super helpful here, especially in these areas where we can't really reach otherwise. And then obviously also right here at the tip of our heart. This is the most difficult part because there is bulk of the seam. We kind of have to very carefully push that part out so that you have this dip, but it seems to work fine here. And then we have this last edge right here. That's also done. And now we can iron this whole thing. I'm gonna leave it like this for ironing because I like to have my facing side facing me so that I can arrange the ditch of the seam better and easier. And because the facing is made in a specific way, it already will lay exactly how it's supposed to, with the ditch of the seam only facing towards the facing side, like so. And the same to the other side. It looks great. Let's turn this whole piece right sides out because I'm going to repeat what I did for the other sleeve, which was a small top stitch. This is, by the way, what it looks like. I think it looks super cute. I think this one even worked better than the other one. I think the heart is more defined here. So I'm going to go ahead and starting from this point right here, I'm gonna go around the heart only. I actually went down here, like on the underside right here, I went towards the hem of the cuff, all the way around the heart and stopped at this point right here at like 3 millimeters with a teeny tiny stitch. I think I did a 1 or 1.5 again. So let's quickly do that. Not quickly, it's gonna take some time because I wanna do it right. Okay, and that is what the finished heart cutout at the cuff area looks like. So we can continue and put the sleeves into our shell, into the body that we already prepped, which is just putting right sides together. So this one goes in here. You can always see that by the cuff cutout, it's towards the back, so it's very easy to find out which sleeve goes where. I'm gonna put the shoulder seam together with the shoulder notch first, and this sleeve does not have any gathering or anything like that. It should fit into our arm's eye very nicely. The sleeve itself is bigger. That's usually the case with sleeves because it just makes a nicer shape once you actually wear it, because it's just, you know, it's nice. But that also means that we have to do a little prep work in order to be able to fit the pieces together. You can see the sleeve seems to be a lot bigger than the arm's eye. I'm just now matching up the notches in my sleeve with the notches or the seams or whatever in my shell, or in the bodice, I guess. You can see it here as well. It's just way too big for, it seems, for now. So what we can do, there are multiple things that we can do. The first thing is to cut towards the stitching line of my arm's eye. This opens up the seam, or not really the seam, but it takes away the tension, so you can align it better to the curve of your sleeve. You can see it very nicely here. And then voila, it fits together perfectly here. If that's not working for you, because sometimes fabrics behave differently, maybe mine, because of the weave, because it is thick fabric or whatever, has a teeny tiny bit elasticity and yours might not, then you might need to gather the stitching line a teeny tiny bit just to fit both lengths together. In the end, this should result in no gathering, folds, nothing in the arm's eye. It just should help you to fit both pieces together. So this is not supposed to gather in the sense of having it visible gathers. It should just help you match up the two lengths. Basically, that's all it does. You will take out the gathering stitch once you're done, because you want to obviously also iron everything nicely, and the gathering stitch is usually in the way of that. But for me, as you can see, it seems to work fine like this. There might be, yeah, if I open this up, it might be even better. Like that, worked out perfectly fine. This should end up looking like this with your piece as well. If not, as I said, you can gather and then take it out again. And I'm gonna put this in and sew the sleeve in. Okay, with that done, this is what it looks like. Very, very nice result. Once we turn this right sides out, you can see that there are no folds in the sleeve or in the shoulder sleeve cap area, like so. And we can continue and iron everything. We want to iron our seam allowance into the sleeve. This makes this cute little bump that you see in the shoulder area. So I like to use a very curved tailor's ham like this one. There are also specific ones for sleeves. I might get one of these because it's just easier. They are shaped like a shoulder area and you just get better results. But for now, this should be fine. And I'm just gonna carefully, since my fingers are very close to the iron, steam and iron this flat. I'm gonna go in from the other side as well. This is just a tiny heads up, I guess, for the fabric. And then here is a lot of bulk because of all of the seams that we have. So this all needs to be a bit flattened like that. And now I'm gonna go in from the wrong side and actually iron everything correctly. And I'm kind of pressing, I'm not really ironing, I'm pressing the fabric, and it just helps a lot if you steam as well. And now the rest we can iron on a flat surface. Just need to peel away the layers, I guess. Also into the sleeve. Okay, this looks very nice. So we can basically continue with our lining and facings because the outside is completely done. I actually did not start with my lining, but did a little experiment right here on my sleeve, and I love it so much. I finished the cuff and everything, put the buttonhole and everything in there just to see the result. And I must say I totally love this, and I'm gonna show you how I did this. So this is yarn that I top stitched onto my sleeve hem with a zigzag stitch. Very, very carefully, 1 centimeter next to the edge right here. and it just accentuates the shape a teeny tiny bit more. I think it just looks a bit more put together, a bit more, I don't know, elegant, I guess. And I put it all around the cuff. This is 2 centimeters right here. And this is actually the part where my microphone stopped working. So I am recording this after the fact. I am essentially explaining here that I am using this very, very old yarn that I found. The only yarn that I had was black, and I'm actually double stranding it. If you have any thicker yarn, it's fine, just use that. So basically what I'm doing I'm putting my yarn right on top of the drawn in line, which I marked with a heat erasable marker. And then I'm using a pretty long zigzag stitch in order to sew the yarn on my lines. And I do that by not pulling on the yarn, I'm just guiding it. Essentially, I'm just holding it in place. You can also just, I don't know if you've seen these hack videos where they glued a piece of straw on their sewing machine to guide whatever yarn they're working with. I'm essentially doing that with my hand. So just keep it in place wherever you see that it is going on the center of your stitch, I guess, and then just keep it there, and then keep your eyes focused on your actual work so that you can guide your presser foot perfectly around the shape that you're sewing your yarn on. That is what I did. And just go around very, very carefully, very slowly. You have all the time that you need. And make sure once you reach the corners to have your needle in your work, and then you can tilt your piece and continue working. That way you are not, losing the spot that you're sewing at. Once you've reached the end of your design, I went over my yarn that I already stitched there and turned my work and stitched over top of that again so that I have it secured in place. I then back tack, and then I can cut everything off and the yarn short. Now next to that line right here, we're gonna make our buttonhole. It's gonna sit 2 millimeters next to it. It's basically centered in this small overlap right here. So I'm quickly just gonna put in my button foot. I know my settings already because I tried it out on my other sleeve, but you probably need to try out your buttonhole before you sew this. So I have the length of 20 millimeters, 3.5 millimeters width, and 0.3 millimeters density. And with that in my settings, I can center everything and sew the buttonhole. And it's already done. And because I'm lazy, this is what it looks like, by the way, very nice and neat. I am going to do my buttons by machine as well, since I'm already here. So if you don't have a setting for actual buttons, you can just do a zigzag stitch and lower the transporter so that you basically stitch at the same location all the time. I'm using an open embroidery foot. I just have a lot more control, I feel like. I think there's also a button foot, like sewing on buttons kind of foot, but I don't have that, and it works fine with this here as well. And it's already done. I like to open my buttonholes with a thread cutter. Just be super, super careful, because you don't want to cut out where, like, outside of the buttonhole, and this can happen super easily. So if you're uncomfortable with that, you can always just use thread scissors. They're a bit more precise, but I find it easiest to just stab with this and then go. So let's try out if that all worked out fine. From my experience, you need to try out the buttonholes a few times before they actually work perfectly. And now we just need to iron this because this is not yet the shape that it's supposed to be. So I used my sleeve board and then arranged everything here as it's supposed to be in the end. So I closed my button. It's way easier now already. And I arranged this portion however I need the heart, however I want the heart to look like. So to me this looks fine. I have a feeling that I kind of pulled on the thread here more than I did over there, but that's fine. Should, work itself evenly once you wear it a couple of times. And now I use hairspray to just stabilize this whole thing a tiny bit. Probably a starch spray is better. I just don't have that here at the moment, so I'm using what I have at hand. It's probably not the healthiest to inhale hairspray fumes. I don't know, just use starch, because then that stiffens the fabric a tiny bit. And why I want to do that is because this little tip right here, it always wants to flap. It does not want to stay down if you don't make it. So just press, steam, and convince. This also loosens the tension of the thread, the yarn, if you have any. So steaming hot, however your fabric can handle. Don't steam too hot, because then you're probably going to melt your fabric if you're working with synthetic, or you're going to damage the fibers. And then this will just kind of, you know, loosen the fabric. It's essentially the same principles as blocking, if you will. You also do that to, you know, kind of relax the fibers a tiny bit and make them stay in the shape that you want them to stay. So we're doing the same here. And this now stays put, which is very nice. We can turn this around and also steam the rest of the cuff, like so. And now we have two very cute heart-shaped cuffs.